Chen never expected her high school nemesis to have such infuriatingly perfect hair, or such eloquent hands when he gestured during rebuttals, or such intense dark eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed arguments. But there Matthew Harrison stood at the podium during the first freshman debate tournament of the year, systematically dismantling her case for implementing year-round schooling with the kind of precision that made her want to throw her notepad at his stupidly handsome face. The opposition's argument fundamentally misunderstands the socioeconomic impact on working families, he was saying, those hands moving in graceful emphasis. While my esteemed opponent makes valid points about educational continuity, she fails to address the critical role of summer employment for students from lower-income backgrounds. Sarah gritted her teeth, scribbling furiously in her flowing cursive, appeal to emotion, redirect to data on learning loss. But even as she prepared her counter, she had to admire the way he commanded the room. For a freshman, his presence was remarkable. Unlike the other novice debaters, who clung to their podiums like life rafts, Matthew moved with confidence, his voice carrying to every corner. Their rivalry had started on the first day of debate club. Sarah had walked in ready to establish herself as the team's rising star, armed with 3 years of middle school debate experience and a folder full of practice cases. Then Matthew had raised his hand during their first practice round and proceeded to quote Aristotle while arguing against her position on mandatory community service, actually quoted ancient philosophy, like some kind of 14-year-old professor. Show off, she'd muttered under her breath. He'd heard her and shot back a grin that made her stomach flip in a way that had nothing to do with pre-debate nerves. Now, 3 tournaments into the season, they developed a pattern. They'd inevitably end up facing each other in elimination rounds, their matches becoming the stuff of local debate circuit legend. 2 freshman powerhouses, neither willing to give an inch. And in conclusion, Matthew was saying now, while the affirmative's proposal is well-intentioned, its implementation would create more problems than it solves. Thank you. He sat down to enthusiastic applause, shooting Sarah that same infuriating grin. She took her place at the podium for her rebuttal, pulse racing with the familiar mix of annoyance and excitement that seemed to accompany all their encounters. The opposition makes several compelling points, she began, voice steady despite her racing heart. However, they rest on fundamentally flawed assumptions. She launched into her response, watching Matthew's face as she systematically addressed each of his arguments. His expression remained neutral, but she caught the slight widening of his eyes when she cited a study he clearly hadn't expected her to know about. Small victories, their teammates had started calling them the dynamic duo, though never to their faces. Where Matthew was all smooth charm and big picture thinking, Sarah was meticulous and tactical, her rebuttals like precision strikes. Together, they were pushing each other to heights unprecedented for freshman debaters. If only he wasn't so Matthew about it all. Excellent rebuttal as always, Chen, he said after the judge awarded her the round by a narrow margin. Though I still think you're wrong about the summer learning loss statistics. In your dreams, Harrison, she shot back, gathering her materials. And stop calling me Chen. We're not at a debate tournament right now. We literally are at a debate tournament right now. You know what I mean. He laughed, and something in her chest tightened at the sound. She pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on organizing her papers with perhaps more vigor than necessary. Want to grab lunch? He asked suddenly. I brought extra pizza rolls, and I know for a fact you always forget to pack enough food during tournaments. She looked up, surprised by the offer. It was true, she did tend to get so focused on preparation that she underpacked her lunch. But still, won't your debate groupies miss you? She asked, nodding toward the cluster of freshman girls, who seemed to follow Matthew from tournament to tournament, giggling behind their hands. He rolled his eyes. Please. I'd much rather hear your thoughts on the private prison resolution for next month's tournament. I have some ideas about approach that I bet you'll hate. "You're probably right," she said, but found herself smiling as she followed him to the cafeteria. They spent lunch arguing about privatization statistics and proper citation formats, their pizza rolls growing cold as they gestured enthusiastically over their notes. If anyone had told Sarah at the start of the year that she'd be sharing lunch with her debate rival, she would have laughed in their face. But there was something about Matthew that made her want to argue with him forever, and maybe that should have been her first clue about where this was all heading. The rest of freshman year passed in a blur of tournaments, study sessions that turned into heated debates, and an increasingly complicated set of feelings that Sarah refused to examine too closely. They pushed each other to excel, their rivalry driving them to spend countless hours in the library researching obscure economic theories and philosophical frameworks. "You know," their debate coach Mr. Rodriguez said one day, watching them practice, "you two make quite a team when you're not trying to destroy each other." Sarah and Matthew exchanged glances, then quickly looked away. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah said primly, shuffling her papers. "Yeah," Matthew agreed, though his ears had turned slightly pink. "We're rivals, not teammates." Mr. Rodriguez just smiled knowingly and walked away, leaving them both feeling strangely unsettled. The final tournament of freshman year found them facing each other yet again, this time arguing about international trade policy. Sarah won by the slimmest of margins, but something felt different about their post-round interaction. "Good round," Matthew said softly, helping her gather her materials. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the same paper, and Sarah felt that now familiar jolt of electricity. "Thanks," she managed. "Your second contention was really strong." "Yeah." He looked pleased. "I actually got the idea from that article you mentioned last week about comparative advantage." She looked up sharply. "You mean you actually listened to my recommendation?" "I always listen to you, Sarah," he said, his voice serious in a way that made her pulse skip. "Even when I'm arguing against you." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Then someone dropped a heavy book nearby, making them both jump. "I should go," Sarah said quickly. "My parents are waiting." "Right, yeah," Matthew agreed, running a hand through his hair. "See you next year." "Count on it," she replied, managing a small smile. "Someone has to keep that ego of yours in check." He laughed, but his eyes were soft in a way that followed her all the way home. That summer, Sarah found herself thinking about Matthew more often than she cared to admit. She told herself it was just because she was preparing for sophomore year, analyzing their past debates to identify areas for improvement. It had nothing to do with the way his face lit up when he made a particularly good point, or how he always seemed to know exactly how to challenge her to think deeper, push harder, be better. Nothing at all. But late at night, working on cases for the upcoming year, she would catch herself wondering what new arguments he would bring, what new ways he would find to surprise her. And maybe, just maybe, she was looking forward to more than just the intellectual challenge. Not that she would ever admit that. They were rivals, after all. Nothing more. Right. The summer before sophomore year changed everything, though neither Sarah nor Matthew realized it at first. Sarah spent June at a prestigious debate camp at Stanford, while Matthew attended a similar program at Yale. They didn't communicate directly, but Sarah found herself checking social media more often than she'd care to admit, clicking through photos of Matthew's debate team victories, and trying to decode his strategies from the glimpses of his flow sheets visible in pictures. It was purely tactical research, she told herself. Know thy enemy and all that. But when they both returned to Lincoln High that fall, something had shifted. Maybe it was the way Matthew's voice had deepened over the summer, or how Sarah had grown her hair out and started wearing it loose instead of in her trademark debate-ready bun. Maybe it was just that they'd both grown up a little, shed some of their freshman awkwardness. Their first encounter of the year happened in the debate club room after school. Sarah was already there, organizing her files for the upcoming tournament season, when Matthew walked in. "Chen," he said, then stopped short, staring at her for a moment longer than strictly necessary. Harrison, she returned, fighting the urge to touch her hair self-consciously. How was Yale? Good. Great, actually. He dropped his bag and took the seat across from her. Learn some new techniques I can't wait to use against you. Funny, she said, allowing herself a small smile. I was thinking the same thing about Stanford. The familiar competitive spark flared between them, but there was something else there too, a new awareness that made the air feel electric. We should practice, he said suddenly. Compare notes. You know, keep our rivalry sharp. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting we help each other? I'm suggesting we challenge each other, he corrected, leaning forward slightly. Unless you're afraid I'll steal all your best arguments. Please, she scoffed, but her heart wasn't really in it. The truth was, the idea of spending more time with Matthew, even under the guise of rivalry, made her pulse quicken in a way she wasn't ready to analyze. They fell into a routine. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons became their unofficial practice sessions. They'd claim the debate room after school, spreading their research across multiple tables, arguing about everything from economic policy to philosophical frameworks. Sometimes their sessions would drift off topic, debate giving way to conversations about college plans, family expectations, the pressure they both felt to excel. Sarah found herself looking forward to these moments almost more than the actual debate practice. Do you ever think about doing something else? She asked one afternoon, after they'd spent 2 hours arguing about healthcare policy. Matthew looked up from his notes, surprised by the personal nature of the question. Like what? I don't know. Something normal. Something that doesn't involve spending every weekend destroying other people's arguments for fun. He was quiet for a moment, considering. Sometimes, he admitted. But then I think about how boring normal would be. His eyes met hers. Besides, who would you argue with if I quit? I'm sure I could find someone, she said lightly, trying to ignore the way her stomach flipped at his gaze. But would they be as good as me? Your ego really knows no bounds, does it? It's not ego if it's true, he grinned, and Sarah threw a pen at him. Their dynamic was evolving, but their competitive spirit remained fierce. At tournaments, they still faced off regularly, their rounds becoming even more intense as they both applied their summer training. The whispers about them grew too. Power couple, some people called them, though never within earshot. Debate royalty. Sarah tried to ignore it all, focusing instead on the rush she got every time she and Matthew went head-to-head. But sometimes, in quiet moments between rounds, she'd catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Or their hands would brush as they passed papers back and forth, and the contact would linger just a moment too long. Everything came to a head at the state qualifiers tournament in March. They met in finals, arguing opposite sides of a resolution about nuclear energy policy. The round was electric, their exchanges sharp and passionate, building on months of practice sessions and shared knowledge. Sarah won, but barely. As they packed up afterward, the tension between them was palpable. Dinner? Matthew asked abruptly. To celebrate your win, Sarah hesitated. They'd never hung out outside of school or tournaments before. Not really. This felt like crossing some kind of line. Just as friends, he added quickly, seeing her hesitation. Or rivals, whatever we are. That, whatever we are, hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Okay, she found herself saying. But you're buying winner's privilege. They ended up at a small diner near the school, sharing a plate of fries and arguing about the round's key points. But something had changed. The competitive edge was softer somehow, wrapped in something that felt dangerously like affection. You know, Matthew said, watching her steal another fry, you're kind of amazing when you debate. Not that I'd ever admit that during a round. Sarah felt her cheeks warm. You're not so bad yourself. When you're not being insufferably smug, I'm always insufferably smug. It's part of my charm. She laughed, and their eyes met across the table. For a moment, Sarah thought he might say something else, something that would shift their carefully maintained balance even further. Instead, he reached across and stole a fry from her side of the plate, breaking the tension. "Hey," she protested. "Victory fries are sacred. All's fair in love and debate," he said with a wink that made her heart stutter. The rest of sophomore year passed in a blur of tournaments, practice sessions, and moments charged with unspoken possibilities. Their rivalry remained intact on the surface, but underneath, something else was growing. Sarah found herself looking forward to their practice sessions more than the actual tournaments. She noticed little things, the way Matthew's voice softened when he talked about his younger sister, how he always remembered to bring her favorite kind of pen to tournaments, the fact that he'd started wearing the blue tie she'd once offhandedly mentioned brought out his eyes. Not that she was paying attention to his eyes. The final tournament of sophomore year arrived with a strange mix of anticipation and melancholy. Summer loomed ahead, promising another separation as they headed off to different debate camps. They met in semifinals this time, and Sarah felt off balance from the start. Matthew seemed distracted too, his usually smooth delivery punctuated by uncharacteristic pauses. She won again, but the victory felt hollow somehow. As they packed up, Matthew cleared his throat. "So, I got into the Harvard summer program," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. Sarah's heart sank. Harvard's program ran all summer, which meant, "That's great," she managed. "Really great. You deserve it." "Thanks." He fiddled with his tie, the blue one. "I'll miss our practice sessions." The words hung between them, more honest than anything they'd said to each other all year. "Yeah," Sarah said softly. "Me too." They stood there for a moment, surrounded by the bustle of the tournament, but somehow alone in their shared silence. "Sarah, Matthew started, then stopped as their coach appeared in the doorway. "Chen. You're up in finals in 5 minutes." The moment shattered. Sarah gathered her things quickly, avoiding Matthew's eyes. "Good luck," he said as she headed for the door. "Not that you need it." She turned back for just a moment. "Right to me. From Harvard." His smile was soft, genuine in a way that made her chest ache. "Every week. Someone has to keep you on your toes for junior year." Sarah went on to win the tournament, but her thoughts kept drifting to Matthew, to all the things left unsaid between them. As sophomore year drew to a close, she couldn't shake the feeling that next year would be different. She just didn't know how different yet. The letters started 2 days after Matthew left for Harvard's summer program. *Chen, Harvard's dining hall coffee is terrible. The library, however, is everything you'd love. Endless rows of books, perfect for hiding research that would destroy your carefully crafted arguments. Speaking of which, wait until you see what I'm preparing for the civil disobedience resolution. Sarah found herself smiling at his familiar mix of competitiveness and casual conversation. She wrote back that evening, Harrison, bold of you to assume I haven't already found every possible argument for civil disobedience. Stanford's library might not be Harvard, but I think you'll be surprised. And yes, I'm absolutely taking that as a challenge. Their summer correspondence became a highlight of Sarah's weeks. Between intensive debate workshops and SAT prep, she found herself checking her email constantly for new messages from Matthew. Their letters evolved from debate strategies to deeper conversations, their fears about college applications, family pressures, dreams beyond high school, sometimes. Matthew wrote in late July, I wonder what it would be like if we weren't always competing. If we were just, the sentence hung there, unfinished. Sarah spent hours staring at those words, her heart racing at the implications. But when school started again in September, everything was different. Matthew returned with a new confidence, his summer at Harvard having added a polish to his already formidable presence. He'd also returned with Olivia Peterson, a transfer student from Phillips Exeter who'd attended the Harvard program with him. Olivia was beautiful, brilliant, and absolutely terrifying in cross-examination. She joined Lincoln High's debate team and quickly established herself as a force to be reckoned with. "Matthew's been helping me adjust," she mentioned casually to Sarah during their first team meeting, her hand lingering on Matthew's arm. "He's such an amazing mentor, don't you think?" Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Yeah," she managed. "He's something." Their Tuesday-Thursday practice sessions resumed, but now Olivia often joined them, her precise arguments and perfectly timed laughs disrupting the rhythm Sarah and Matthew had developed over the past 2 years. "We should all study together for the Princeton tournament," Olivia suggested one afternoon. "My host family has this amazing lake house we could use for the weekend. What do you think, Matt?" "Matt." She called him Matt. "Actually," Sarah cut in, gathering her things, "I should go. I promised my mom I'd help with dinner tonight." It was a lie, and from Matthew's expression, he knew it. But he didn't stop her as she left, and somehow that hurt worse than anything else. The first semester of junior year became a blur of college visits, AP classes, and tournaments where Sarah threw herself into competition with an intensity that worried even her coach. "Everything okay?" Mr. Rodriguez asked after she won her 3rd tournament in a row, her victories marked by an almost aggressive precision. "You seem different this year." "I'm fine," she said shortly. Just focused. She and Matthew still faced each other in elimination rounds, but something had changed. Their usual playful banter was replaced by cold efficiency. Their arguments became sharper, more personal somehow. "The opposition's emotional appeals lack any substantive backing," Matthew said during one particularly heated round, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Much like their commitment to thorough research and preparation." Sarah felt the jab like a physical blow. She'd missed their usual practice session that week, making an excuse about SAT prep. They both knew it wasn't true. She won the round but felt hollow afterward. As she packed up, she noticed Matthew and Olivia leaving together, their heads bent close in conversation. That night, Sarah pulled up the emails from summer, reading through them again and again, trying to understand where things had gone wrong. "I wonder what it would be like if we weren't always competing." The answer seemed clear now, but debate waited for no broken heart, and the season continued. Sarah and Matthew maintained their positions at the top of the circuit, their rounds becoming the stuff of legend not just for their technical excellence but for the crackling tension that seemed to fill the room whenever they faced each other. "You two need to figure this out," Mr. Rodriguez said after one particularly brutal semifinal. "Whatever this is, it's affecting your debate." "There's nothing to figure out," Sarah insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. The breaking point came at the regional championships in February. Sarah and Matthew met in finals, with Olivia watching from the audience. The resolution was about interpersonal obligations and ethical decision-making, which felt almost cruelly appropriate. "When we make commitments to others," Matthew argued during his constructive, "we have an ethical obligation to see them through. To communicate. To not simply disappear when things get complicated." Sarah's hand tightened around her pen. This wasn't about the resolution anymore. Her rebuttal was equally pointed. "The opposition speaks about commitment while conveniently ignoring the role of external factors. Sometimes what appears to be abandonment is actually self-preservation." The room crackled with tension. Even the judge seemed uncomfortable. Sarah won, barely. As they packed up, Matthew approached her table. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "I think you've said enough," Sarah replied, not meeting his eyes. "Congratulations on 2nd place." "Sarah, please, Matt." Olivia's voice cut through the moment. "We're going to be late for dinner with my parents." Sarah looked up then, meeting Matthew's gaze for the first time in what felt like months. Something passed between them, regret, longing, anger, she wasn't sure. "You should go," she said softly. Don't keep them waiting. She watched him leave with Olivia, then sat in the empty classroom for a long time, surrounded by flow sheets and evidence cards, and all the words they'd never said to each other. That night, she drafted and deleted a dozen emails to Matthew. They all said the same thing in different ways. I miss you. I miss us. I miss what we were before everything got so complicated. She didn't send any of them. The next week, something unexpected happened. Olivia dropped by debate practice to announce she was leaving the team. My parents want me to focus on Model UN, she explained. And honestly, Matt and I decided we're better as friends. The whole mentorship thing just got a bit messy. Sarah tried not to let her surprise show. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Olivia gave her a knowing look. Are you? Before Sarah could respond, Olivia continued, you know, he talks about you all the time. Even when we were whatever we were. It was always, Sarah would approach this argument differently, or, Sarah would love this research. It got a bit annoying, actually. She smiled then, genuine and a little sad. Don't waste time being afraid, Sarah. Life's too short for that. With that, she was gone, leaving Sarah to process this new information alone in the debate room, where everything had started. That afternoon, for the first time in months, Matthew showed up for their regular Thursday practice session. He stood in the doorway, looking uncertain. Hey, he said. Hey, she replied. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. I broke up with Olivia, he said finally. Or she broke up with me. It was mutual, really. I heard. Another pause. I missed this, he said quietly. Missed you. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. You're the one who stopped coming to practice. You're the one who stopped letting me in. They stared at each other across the room. 3 years of competition and friendship and something more hanging in the balance. Finally, Sarah spoke, the civil rights resolution for next week. Want to prep? It wasn't forgiveness, not quite. But it was a start. Matthew's smile was small but real as he took his usual seat across from her. Only if you're ready to admit that your interpretation of Malcolm X's philosophy is fundamentally flawed. In your dreams, Harrison. They stayed late that night, arguing and laughing, and slowly finding their way back to whatever they were before. But something had changed. They'd both grown up a little, learned a little more about what they wanted. As junior year drew to a close, Sarah found herself thinking about that unfinished sentence from Matthew's summer email, I wonder what it would be like if we weren't always competing, maybe, she thought, watching him gesture enthusiastically about Supreme Court precedent. They were about to find out. Senior year began with a letter. Sarah found it tucked into her debate folder on the first day of school, Matthew's familiar handwriting flowing across the page, Dear Sarah, not Chen, because this isn't about debate, I spent all summer thinking about what I want to say to you, and somehow I'm still not sure I have the right words. Ironic, isn't it? 3 years of competitive debate, and I can't figure out how to tell you, but maybe that's the problem. Maybe we've spent too much time competing and not enough time just being us. Whatever us means, so here's my proposition, debate habits die hard. This year, let's not let the competition get in the way. Let's just be Sarah and Matthew, not Chen and Harrison. Let's see what happens, what do you say, Matthew, not Harrison, Sarah read the letter 3 times, her heart racing. Then she noticed the postscript, PS, I'll be in our debate room after school. If you want to talk. Or argue. Or whatever, she spent all day thinking about that letter, about everything it said and didn't say. When the final bell rang, her feet carried her to the debate room almost automatically. Matthew was there, pretending to organize files but really just shuffling the same papers over and over. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Hey, he said softly. Sarah held up the letter. Did you really write this over summer, or did you just say that to sound romantic? His laugh was surprised and genuine. Trust you to cross-examine me about a personal letter. Old habits, she shrugged, but she was smiling too. I did write it over summer, he admitted. About 50 different versions, actually. Ask my sister, she had to endure all of them. Sarah took her usual seat across from him, the familiar position somehow feeling different now. So not competing. Well, I mean, we still have to compete in actual tournaments, he clarified. But maybe outside of that, we could just BS. Yeah. His eyes met hers. I'd like to know what that's like. And just like that, everything shifted. They still practiced together, still faced each other in tournaments, still argued about everything from policy proposals to pizza toppings. But now there was something else too, study sessions, that turned into movie nights, coffee runs before school, long conversations about everything and nothing. Their teammates noticed the change. The whispers of debate power couple took on a different tone, especially after Sarah and Matthew started arriving at tournaments together, sharing snacks between rounds, sitting a little closer than strictly necessary during team meetings. Finally, Mr. Rodriguez muttered one day, watching them share earbuds while prepping for a round. Thought I was going to have to lock you two in the debate room until you figured it out. Their competitive dynamic shifted too. They were still fierce opponents in rounds, but the edge of personal tension was gone, replaced by something more playful, more affectionate. The opposition's argument, while eloquently stated by my esteemed colleague, Matthew said during one round, his eyes twinkling, completely overlooks the statistical evidence that I know for a fact he studied last night, because I was there quizzing him on it. The judge tried not to smile. Sarah definitely failed at hiding hers, but senior year brought its own complications. College applications loomed, and with them, the reality that their paths might diverge. Yale's early decision deadline is next week, Matthew mentioned casually one evening as they studied in his family's living room, his younger sister occasionally wandering through to steal their snacks. Sarah's heart clenched. Yale was Matthew's dream school, and it was across the country from Stanford, her first choice. You're going to get in, she said, trying to keep her voice light. They'd be crazy not to take the guy who quoted Aristotle in his first high school debate round. You're never going to let me live that down, are you? Never. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Stanford's deadline is the same day. Yeah. They looked at each other, 3 years of history and competition and growing feelings hanging between them. We should talk about it, Sarah said finally. The college thing. We should, Matthew agreed. But can we just not? For tonight. Instead, they watched old debate videos, critiquing their freshman selves with a mix of embarrassment and nostalgia. Look at your hair, Sarah laughed, pointing at freshman Matthew's attempt at a professional hairstyle. Look at your power suits, he shot back. How many shoulder pads did you need? Hey, I was trying to be intimidating. Trust me, he said softly, you didn't need the shoulder pads for that. Their first kiss happened after the Harvard Invitational in December. They'd both made it to late elimination rounds, but lost in different brackets, a rare tournament where they didn't face each other. Want to get dinner? Matthew asked as they packed up. To commiserate our mutual defeat. They ended up at a small Italian restaurant near the hotel, talking about everything except debate or college decisions. As they walked back, snow started falling softly around them. Your nose is red, Matthew observed, stopping under a streetlight. It's cold, Sarah defended, but she was smiling. He reached out, brushing a snowflake from her cheek. Sarah. Yeah, I'm going to kiss you now. If that's okay. She nodded, heart racing, and then his lips were on hers, soft and sweet and perfect. When they pulled apart, they were both grinning like idiots. Took you long enough, Sarah murmured. I was waiting for the right moment to make my case, he replied, and she groaned at the debate pun even as she pulled him in for another kiss. The college decisions came in spring: Yale for Matthew, Stanford for Sarah. They celebrated each other's acceptances with genuine joy, tinged with bittersweet understanding. 3,000 miles, Sarah said quietly as they sat in their debate room during lunch. And 3 time zones, Matthew added. But hey, there's this amazing invention called the internet. I hear it's pretty good for keeping in touch. Better than your Harvard summer letters. Much better. Though I might still write you letters. For nostalgia's sake, the end of senior year approached rapidly, bringing with it the final tournament of their high school careers, national championships. They'd both qualified, and the brackets were set up so they could potentially meet in finals. Like a movie script, their teammates joked. The perfect ending. The night before they left for nationals, Matthew and Sarah sat in his car outside her house, neither wanting to say goodnight. Whatever happens tomorrow, Matthew said, these past 4 years, I wouldn't change anything. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Not even the Olivia thing. Okay, maybe that. But it led us here, didn't it? She leaned over and kissed him softly. Yeah, it did. As they drove to the tournament the next morning, Sarah thought about all the rounds they'd had against each other, all the arguments and evidence cards and stolen glances. About how competing with Matthew had made her better, not just as a debater but as a person. The preliminary rounds flew by. They both advanced through elimination rounds, working their way through increasingly difficult competition. And then, like something out of a story, they found themselves advancing to finals. Their last round against each other. Their last high school debate ever. The resolution was announced: in matters of the heart, logic must yield to emotion. They looked at each other across the prep room, and started laughing. Ready for one last round, Chen? Matthew asked, his eyes soft. Sarah took his hand, squeezing it quickly before they had to separate to prep their cases. Bring it on, Harrison. The final round room was packed. Word had spread through the tournament about the two rivals turned something more facing off in their last high school debate ever, and it seemed like everyone wanted to witness it. Sarah sat at the affirmative table, watching Matthew organize his papers across the room. He was wearing the blue tie, the one she'd complimented all those years ago. She touched the small silver pendant at her neck, a good luck charm he'd given her before semifinals. In matters of the heart, logic must yield to emotion. The resolution seemed to mock them both. 4 years of logical arguments and careful analysis, all leading to this moment where they'd debate about the very thing they'd been dancing around for so long. Mr. Rodriguez stopped by their tables before the round began. Whatever happens, he said quietly, you two have already made history. Now go make some more. The room fell silent as the judge called for the round to begin. Sarah stood, approaching the podium for her constructive speech. She looked at her carefully prepared flow sheet, then at Matthew, and made a decision. The resolution before us today states that in matters of the heart, logic must yield to emotion, she began. As I stand here preparing to make my final argument in competitive debate, I find myself thinking about logic, emotion, and the false dichotomy we create between them. She caught Matthew's eye, saw him lean forward slightly. 4 years ago, I walked into this activity armed with logic, with statistics and studies and carefully crafted arguments. I thought that was all I needed. She smiled slightly, and then I met someone who challenged everything I thought I knew about debate, and about myself. Murmurs rippled through the audience. This wasn't a typical debate approach. The affirmative argues that the resolution is fundamentally flawed because it assumes logic and emotion are opposing forces. In reality, they are complementary aspects of human experience, and decision-making research in neuroscience shows that emotional intelligence enhances logical reasoning. Studies in psychology demonstrate that our most rational decisions are often guided by emotional intuition. She launched into her arguments, weaving personal experience with academic research, building a case that was both technically sound and deeply personal. When she finished her constructive, the room was completely silent for a moment before breaking into applause. Matthew stood for cross-examination, his eyes never leaving hers. The affirmative makes a compelling case about the integration of logic and emotion, he began, his voice soft but carrying. But isn't there inherent risk in allowing emotion to influence decisions that require objective analysis? On the contrary, Sarah responded, I would argue that attempting to completely separate emotion from decision-making is not only impossible but potentially harmful. The most effective decisions come from understanding and balancing both aspects. Their exchange continued, dancing between technical debate and something more personal, each question and answer loaded with 4 years of shared history. When it was Matthew's turn to present his case, he straightened his blue tie and approached the podium. The opposition concedes many of the affirmative's points about the false dichotomy between logic and emotion, he began. However, we would argue that the resolution's true significance lies not in the yielding of logic to emotion, but in the courage to recognize when both are telling you the same thing. He glanced at Sarah. Sometimes, the most logical decision is to listen to your heart. The round continued, their arguments intertwining in a way that felt less like competition and more like conversation, like the culmination of every practice session, every late-night study meeting, every moment that had led them here. Their rebuttals were sharp but tender, each acknowledging the other's points while building their own cases. The room remained transfixed, watching these two competitors who somehow managed to be perfectly matched yet completely complementary. When the final rebuttal ended, there was a moment of absolute silence, before the room erupted in applause. Sarah and Matthew remained standing at their respective podiums, looking at each other across the space that had defined their relationship for so long. The judge's decision was almost secondary to what had just happened between them, but they sat nervously holding hands under the table as the ballots were tabulated. In what will certainly go down as one of the most unique and compelling final rounds in national history, the head judge began. The decision goes to the affirmative, Sarah Chen. The room exploded in cheers. Sarah felt Matthew squeeze her hand, saw his genuine smile of pride and affection. They were directed to the awards stage for the ceremony, climbing the steps to the winner's podium together. As Sarah was handed her championship trophy, she turned to Matthew, who was receiving the second-place award. Their eyes met, and suddenly 4 years of competition, friendship, and growing love crystallized into a single moment. Matthew moved first, or maybe they both did. The kiss was gentle but certain, there on the winner's podium in front of the entire national debate community. Someone wolf whistled. Mr. Rodriguez could be heard saying, finally, rather loudly. When they broke apart, they were both laughing. Guess logic yielded to emotion after all, Matthew murmured. No, Sarah replied, smiling up at him. They finally worked together perfectly. Later that night, at the celebration dinner with their team, Sarah found the letter she'd started writing to Matthew before finals, tucked into her debate folder, Dear Matthew, not Harrison, because this isn't about debate anymore, for 4 years, we've argued about everything. Policy, philosophy, whether pineapple belongs on pizza, it doesn't, and I'll never concede that point. But here's something I won't argue about, somewhere between all those rounds, and practice sessions and coffee runs, I fell in love with you, maybe it was freshman year, when you quoted Aristotle just to annoy me. Maybe it was sophomore year, during all those late-night practice sessions. Maybe it was junior year, when losing you to someone else made me realize what you meant to me. Or maybe it was senior year, when we finally stopped competing long enough to see what was right in front of us, The point is, debate habits die hard. It doesn't matter when it happened. What matters is that it did. And no matter what happens after today, win or lose, Stanford or Yale, 3,000 miles or 3 steps apart, that's one fact I'll never need evidence to prove, Sarah, not Chen, she never did give him the letter. Instead, she pulled him away from the celebration for a moment, into the quiet hallway of the hotel. "So," she said, "about those 3,000 miles. Yeah, I was thinking. Stanford and Yale both have amazing debate teams." "They do," he agreed, pulling her closer. "And lots of tournaments, where they compete against each other." "Fascinating point. Continue." She laughed, hitting his arm lightly. "I'm trying to say that maybe this doesn't have to be an ending. Maybe it's just the beginning of a different kind of competition." "Sarah Chen, are you suggesting we maintain our rivalry into college?" "I'm suggesting," she said, standing on tiptoe to kiss him softly, "that some things are worth crossing 3,000 miles for." His smile was bright enough to light up the whole hallway. "Well, when you make such a logical argument. Shut up and kiss me, Harrison." And for once in their long history of debates, he did exactly what she asked without argument. Back in the celebration, their teammates were trading stories about their famous rivalry turned romance, each claiming they'd known all along how it would end. Mr. Rodriguez was showing anyone who would listen the video of their first freshman year debate against each other, pointing out the signs that had been there from the beginning. But Sarah and Matthew, standing in their quiet hallway, weren't thinking about the past or even worrying too much about the future. They were just there, together, in a moment that felt both like an ending and a beginning. Their story had started with arguments, grown through competition, and blossomed in the space between logic and emotion. And while they would certainly continue to debate, it was too much a part of who they were not to. They had finally found something better than winning. They had found each other.